If you were looking at the Texas Aggie bonfire, you would see 6 layers that get smaller as you go to the top, kind of like a wedding cake.
I was so excited to see this thing go. I had never seen anything like this before.
I never wondered if bonfire would ever fall.
In literally a split second, I realized the ground was moving.
The tower shakes. The only thing I had time to do was just grab the logs in front of me.
We were both just kind of looking at each other like, what's going on?
Tenths of a second later, it was all over.
I was completely trapped. There was no way I was going to get out of there.
My name is Bill Davis. I'm from Houston, Texas, and I started Texas A&M University in the fall of 1998. There was something about A&M that just captured me. It was friendly from the word howdy, which is the official greeting of A&M. The university, College Station, it all feels so much like a little bubble, like you're there with your friends and it's maybe 100 people. Most of which you feel like you know. If you don't, you have absolutely everything in common with them.
It is a school that has a lot of traditions, and it really helps to set a tone and a mood for the environment. My dad said there were only 2 engineering schools in Texas, and he was only going to pay for one of them, so I became a Texas Aggie. I did not know anyone. I was the only person from my graduating class to go there, so I didn't have any pre-made friends or anybody to hang out with, so I had to meet all new friends. So when I got into the dorm, there were people out helping carry stuff in, and they were part of the bonfire community. Texas Aggie Bonfire was when we would create a really big pile of wood to burn the night before the Texas A&M University of Texas football game.
If you lived in a dorm, there was a channel dedicated to just, all it showed was 24 hours a day bonfire, even before it was even started to be built. Bonfire started in 1909 when a bunch of students at the time were excited about their rivalry game with the University of Texas coming up and literally tore down a barn so that they had wood to burn to build a bonfire to celebrate. The burning of bonfires is meant to symbolize the burning desire to be to you.
So if you were looking at the Texas Aggie bonfire, you would see 6 layers that get smaller as you go to the top, kind of like a wedding cake. And the tallest it ever got, I think, was over 100 feet. 50,000 people circled around this thing burning, and it was just a way to bring the campus all together before the last football game of the season. The bonfire community was really what knit most of the dorms together and what created a lot of the unity on campus.
When I started at Texas A&M, it was the fall of 1999. I was the first Aggie in my family, and so I really didn't know what kind of world I was stepping into at that point. They have the saying that from the outside you can't understand it, and from the inside you can't explain it. So when I originally went to A&M, I really didn't understand what kind of culture it was and what the traditions were like or anything of that nature. The RA came in and introduced himself, asked if I'd be interested in going out to Bonfire, and I said yes, because there was already a bunch of people that were going to go, and I saw it as an opportunity to meet a lot of people.
In November of 1999, I was actually a sophomore. This was my second year to work on Bonfire.
Guys, welcome to A&M. Who wants to set something on fire? You're gonna help us build a bonfire.
Tonight?
Oh no, we're gonna build it over the next couple months.
Myself and 4 other guys were in charge of our dorm mess, and all of the spring of 1999, we did practically everything with the girls from Mosier.
Hey! Room 301. Mandy, right?
Yeah.
What are you doing, like, right now?
Miranda Adams was a Mosier girl for 1999 bonfire.
You want to come?
Mosier girls are leaders in the dorms, so they're the ones responsible for recruiting people to participate in the different activities. So to participate in bonfire, you had to have a pot.
A pot, in terms of bonfire, was really just a helmet. It's basically the helmets they used in World War II.
So they would have pot painting parties out in the courtyard, and they would bring paint and masking tape and stickers. You could put your name on it or whatnot.
There's kind of a hierarchy that's done by pots, and they're signified normally by colors. Each dorm has their own color, but also the main student leaders are red pots, and they have a red helmet, and it passes from person to person each year. Whoever had the pot would choose a successor, and then they would pass that pot down to the next person. It's kind of meant to unify people.
In the fall of 1999, Tim Jr. started as a freshman at Texas A&M.
Hey, Miranda.
He was already looking forward to working on bonfire. Tim was an adventurer, so the idea of working on the bonfire was another one of those big adventures for him, and he couldn't wait to start working on it.
Bonfire is an interesting experience because you're a freshman and you're going out to meet new people, but then you're putting it in a mindset of cutting down trees by hand with axes. Cut is the actual process of going out about 30 or 40 miles from the campus and physically cutting down the trees. The first day of cut, they bring out speakers onto each floor of the dorm at about 3:30 in the morning and play what's called a wake-up song and just blast it as loud as they can and tell everybody to wake up, it's time to go out to bonfire. So you groggily throw on your groats, which are like your clothes, your jeans and your shirt, which we don't wash until we burn it. So like these things stand up in the corner by the time we're about to burn it.
We would go out to land donated by a former student, and we would cut down the trees.
Guys with the chainsaws clear the trees. After we've chopped them off, they get, cleared so that they're just basically a sheer log.
And we would load them up and take them back to campus, and then they'd be sorted by size into piles, and then we would stack them up into 6 stacks.
Grab a bite, roll forward.
And when you're out there doing that kind of like hard manual labor, it really separates the men from the boys real quick. And you realize who's a real worker and who's not. We basically have a line of people standing there with axes in their hand, and you go up to the tree and, you take as many swings as you can on it to chop it down, and when you are tired, you get to the back of the line.
Get some shade, buddy.
The guys taught us how to swing the axes, and you have to kind of get into a rhythm, and it was very empowering. It made you feel like you could do anything when you chop down trees all day, so.
Once that tree starts to shake, nobody wants to leave because they want to be the one that takes the tree down.
To actually use your time and go out and spend all day cutting down trees with an axe by hand, it's dedication, it's relying on the people around you, and it cuts through barriers. People you don't know can be your friend at the end of the day because you spent all day, and they put in all the hard work that you did.
That's more like it.
Stop wasting my water, Bill.
Just for that.
I saw a guy swinging his axe on a tree. He wasn't holding on tight enough, and it ricocheted, popped out of one hand, and went into his boot.
Let's face it, there are accidents that happen. I mean, an axe head can come off while you're swinging it, and it can go you know, flying back into a group of people. I never thought it was dangerous. I look back now and I'm like, oh, you know, what were they thinking? But, oh, that's safe. I'll just climb up on that thing. I really didn't think that this was going to be something that was going to ultimately injure me until November 18th of 1999.
Three, four, all the way up.
My name is Will Hurd, and in 1999, I was student body president at Texas A&M. My job was kind of always representing all students, whether they participated in Bonfire or not. I had a lot of friends that were building, so at night you'd go out and visit with them. It was something that I had, you know, been interacting with for most of my time at A&M.
Bonfire was a very important tradition, if not one of the biggest traditions at A&M. And it was very well supported by the university. It wasn't just a bunch of 18-year-olds going out and doing this on our own. You'll hear stories and you realize that you want to have a story too. We used to like to say that 5,000 people build it and 75,000 people watch it burn.
Cut would last anywhere from probably 10 to 12 weeks, depending on how much wood was cut down and how many logs of each size we had.
And then they bring in this center pole kind of as the first building block for them to put the rest of the logs together around it. From there, once all the trees are loaded onto the polo field, we would start the process called stack, which is actually moving the logs into position to build the actual structure.
It had a buzz around campus. People started talking about it. Hey, have you seen they started stack? People would go out and just literally build a campfire and watch it being built at night. So Bonfire, it meant a whole lot more than just the burning desire to be TU, but it was really, it's kind of hard to explain exactly what that was, but it's, I can't even put it into words. I'm struggling to find the right words for it. Stack would last 6 to 8 weeks, but the last 2 weeks was considered push week. And what push week was adding that midnight to 6 a.m. shift. We had a limited amount of time and we needed to finish building Bonfire.
Enjoy the view, guys. This is as high as freshmen go.
I want to see it from the top.
Well, you're gonna have to buck if you want that.
Buck?
Prove yourself, kiddo.
Tim called me one night, and he was saying, Mom, I've been promoted to the swing seat. And he explained to me that Crane would bring in another log, and it was his job in the swing seat to guide that log into place where other people would wire it in. My maternal instinct was, it sounds dangerous. But I knew that that's not what he wanted to hear. And so I said, well, Tim, that sounds like fun. And he goes, oh, Mom, it is. It's a lot of fun.
On November 18th of 1999, I had missed a management test. And so I was in my dorm room studying because the next day I had to take both tests in succession. My crew chiefs came to the door, and, you know, all four of them.
Let's go, Comstock.
I need the night off. I gotta take 2 tests tomorrow.
Don't let us down. We need you out on stack tonight.
Okay. Just for a while.
They banged on my door and eventually convinced me to go out there, and we actually had a double shift. So we were doing, I believe, like a 12 to 6 and then a 6 to 12. I don't regret going out there and being a part of that tradition. I kind of threw away that schoolwork because I felt like Bonfire was something more important. And it's an experience that you can't really find in a textbook.
We went out there, got together with our dorm, and met the Mosier girls and walked out to the polo fields. Miranda was a co-chair in charge of Mosier, and myself and 4 other guys were in charge of our dorm, Aston. Probably got out there about 11:45 that night. We were excited to be out there, excited, had a big group.
I was out at the stack site, and somebody told me that Miranda was looking for me, and they told me that she was over by the parking lot. So I walked over and I found her standing underneath a tree.
Miranda! You said you were looking for me?
Do you know what tree this is? It's the Mosier tree. It's our dorm's tree.
I didn't know we had a tree.
It's the tree where all the Mosier girls pass on their pots. I need someone to take over for me next year to lead the incoming freshmen in Bonfire.
Are you asking me?
I was very surprised and shocked. I didn't think that I had made that much of an impression. I guess she just thought that I would have been a good leader for the dorm.
Yes. Okay. Yes.
The tiers were coming together and starting to look like that classic wedding cake design. As you walked towards it, glowing in the floodlights, it looked like it was almost ready to be burned. And it was looking pretty.
It was the midnight to 6 a.m. shift, and my mom and I kind of had a conversation about my participation, and she wasn't really sure about it, but I was in college and I was gonna do what I wanted to do, so I was wiring first stack from the ground. The way you wire trees in is someone carries the trees over and they kind of slam it up to the stack from horizontal to vertical, and then you're standing there at the bottom with some pieces of wire, and you start wiring it in with my pliers and my wire, and you twist it really tight.
I had climbed up to second stack, which was, I don't know, roughly 40 feet up. When they put new logs up, it always stretched up above where they had cut them, so it acted almost like a railing. I was leaning out and looking for my dorm. Part of my responsibility was to call logs and help steer the log towards the structure and then get it set to be pushed up.
Someone came over and asked if I wanted to get in a swing.
Hey, Mandy, have you been up in the swings yet?
Not yet.
Get up here and give it a shot.
Okay.
I'm kind of like one of those people there. I don't want anybody to show me up or think I'm a chicken or, so I was like, sure, I'll try it. I hadn't done it yet, and so I kind of wanted to have the full experience.
Tim Jr. had been working in the swing seat, but he wanted his buddy to experience the fun of the swing seat.
You gotta try this swing.
So he convinced him to sit in the swing seat and for him to do that job, and Tim climbed up to the 4th layer, and he was performing the job of finish guiding the logs into place and wiring them to other logs.
My crew chiefs told me, climb up there as high as you can and work on the structure. The higher you can get, the better. It's considered, I guess, more prestigious.
Whoa.
I was up about 55 feet, and so you can pretty much see everything. You can see down the strip. You can see everybody working below you.
I don't know if I heard something or if I felt something, but there was a guy standing on top of first stack above me, and him and I kind of locked eyes with each other, and we didn't say anything, but it was kind of like we were both just kind of looking at each other like, what's going on?
I was looking at the ground, looking for my dorm, and in literally a split second, I realized the ground was moving.
And I said I was going to bring in a few more logs and then I was going to be done for the night because I needed to really get back to those 2 tests that I had to study for. The tower shakes and almost enough to throw me off balance. I basically had to immediately lean forward and kind of do one of these deals to catch my balance. As the structure went down, the center pole just exploded in this loud boom. The only thing I had time to do was just grab the logs in front of me and just hang on.
I remember explicitly having this thought is, this thing is falling towards me. I need to push off as best as I can to get away from this thing.
I remember just thinking something bad was happening and then feeling the feeling of falling.
Tenths of a second later, it felt like it was all over.
I was out for a little while. I must have hit my head or something when I hit the ground, and so I kind of woke up and it was dark. It was really quiet. It was like eerily quiet. It was real dusty and I could kind of see like some light, and then I realized what was holding the trees off of me was there was a yellow crane, and that had caught all the trees to hold them off of my body. I could feel trees to my right, and when I looked to my left, I could see kind of a pocket of light. You're kind of in panic mode to get out. So I crawled out to my left by the tires of the crane. It was really dark, but there's lights in the parking lot, so you could kind of see like a glow, but it was really dusty. Like there was all this dust in the air, I guess, from the logs hitting the ground.
I don't know how long I was knocked out for. Not very long, because when I opened my eyes, the dust that had been thrown into the air from the structure collapsing came down into my face through all the logs and everything else. So I just got this fistful of dirt in my face to the point where you can't even close your eye. I was pinned with a log across my waist, and a log on top of that was across the right side of my face. It actually hit my head so hard that my lower teeth went through my lower gum. Since I had put my right arm into the logs in front of me, when the structure went down, it made my right bicep completely pinned between those two logs. And of course, there's a lot of weight still on top of all of this, and ultimately, I could not move at all. The only part that was mobile was my left arm, and it could be seen out of a small gutter-sized hole.
There I was, laying on the ground, not able to move, trapped under bonfire. I was in probably a cavity of logs about the size of my chest with maybe an inch or two more. There wasn't pressure on me. I didn't feel like there was pressure on my body squeezing at me, but I couldn't breathe. I was against the dirt, face down. I was later told I was only 3 to 5 feet in from the perimeter of the pile. My left elbow was flared out. Best way I can tell it is, imagine you're doing the song, I'm a Little Teapot, Short and stout. Here's my handle. So when you do the handle part, that was my elbow, and there was literally a log parallel with my body that had fallen on my elbow. I had no idea how much of it was on me. I have no idea what was over me, whether it was 2 logs and I was near the edge, or the entire structure and I was in the center.
One of my closest friends called me and said, Will, something happened at Bonfire. You should probably get up to campus. And so as I was approaching the polo fields, it looked like a scene out of a movie. I've lived in India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, you know, as an undercover officer in the CIA. I've seen disasters, I've seen things, and this is still one of the most vivid memories in my mind of what a catastrophe looks like. You see the bonfire stack, this, you know, about 100-foot structure, and looked like a Jenga pile had just fallen apart. You realize immediately that some of your classmates and friends are trapped under a couple of tons of logs. It's pretty scary.
I don't know what I was focused on, but I think it was a survival instinct. I don't know. I knew people were around the stack. Even after it fell, I knew people were close by. I remember yelling for anybody.
Bonfire had collapsed and there was over 20 people injured.
Holy cow, this is gonna be real.
He said, I'm fine. I need you to help them first.
Please, I need you to tell me how long to go, and that's what I'll do.
I was able to stand up, and then I tried to start running away, and I couldn't.
Help! Miranda! Somebody! Come on! Help! Somebody!
The pliers must have got caught between 2 logs as I was crawling out, and so I was trying to yank on it, and I was screaming and yelling for help.
Oh, God! Please!
At that point, I started crying, and kind of out of the foggy dirtness comes this guy. I didn't recognize him at all, but he just kind of ran out of the cloud of dust and pretty much yanked the pliers out and scooped me up and carried me off to the side. I was shaking, probably from the adrenaline rush, and so they all thought I was cold, so they started piling their coats on me to keep me warm.
On November 18th, 1999, at approximately 2:30 in the morning, I was sleeping when I received a radio call that I'll never forget.
University Police, what's your emergency?
Texas University, the bonfire stack just collapsed. There are people trapped in it.
Okay, we've got units on the way.
As a student EMT, Texas A&M campus was our responsibility. So when I heard the radio call that the bonfire had collapsed and we needed all available units to respond, your instincts take over immediately and you run to it. Get out of bed and you put on your shoes and you get there. That's what you're trained to do, and that's what you're supposed to do.
Stack just collapsed. Stack just collapsed. We're going to have a lot of casualties. Get Bryan College Station rolling. Get University of West rolling.
First thing I noticed was a big cloud of dust.
Starting reporting on scene.
I made my way to our ambulance, checked in on the radio, grabbed a pair of gloves, and went straight to the stack.
Okay, fire and EMT are on their way. We can help by tagging and noting the locations of anyone who needs to get evacuated first.
I kind of panicked at first, and I was waving my left arm on the ground, and somebody came up and grabbed it, and they said that they knew where I was, and that they had to go help other people, but, you know, that they would be back. And with him saying that, I didn't feel the need to have to wave my arm on the ground anymore. He had taken my hand when he said that. And that calmed me. And at that point, I just kind of waited.
I can vividly remember and imagine it all. I can remember that night and the way it felt, how cold it was, how, for some reason, I remember it being somewhat still. I couldn't lift up and slide my arm out, so I was snug enough that I couldn't lift, but tight enough that I couldn't slide my arm out.
Anyone?
On November 18th, 1999, I was the on-duty battalion chief. The call came in around 02:45 in the morning. The bonfire had collapsed and there was over 20 people injured at the site.
I can remember responding to the call going and thinking in the back of your mind that this is nothing and why are we going to campus? Why did they wake us up? Because A&M has their own EMS. So why are we going? Until I got up on Texas Avenue and looked out my window and saw that bonfire had fallen. Holy cow, this is gonna be real.
The Texas A&M EMS was able to do a complete survey of the entire stack, go around it once or maybe even twice, and give us updated information when we arrived on the scene. Two female students brought us a list of the names of the people they thought were unaccounted for. That list, I don't know how they got it, but it had 8 of the names were accurate.
We're gonna need every unit in College Station. Bryan City FD too.
We were putting triage tags on different people at that point. That way we could identify their immediate necessity, whether they needed to go to the hospital now or whether they were gonna have to stay there. Just crawling through the dirt and the logs and looking for people at that point.
The news of the event traveled very quickly. The news helicopters were flying over. Some of the TV stations had already broke in and were providing live coverage.
Once it fell, you just hear people yelling for help.
I was executive director of university relations at Texas A&M the night the bonfire collapsed. I was sound asleep in bed when the phone call came. I distinctly remember asking, are the media there yet? Because I knew that would become my primary responsibility. I had been at Texas A&M for only 4 months, so I had no comprehension of how huge this stack was. In my mind, I was thinking of a bonfire when you go off to camp, where you roast marshmallows, and I knew it was going to be larger than that, but I had no comprehension how huge it was, or whether or not we would have deaths or whether we would have injuries. But you have to, in these kinds of instances, get over that shock and realize that you have a job to do.
It was a bit, at first, overwhelming, but I knew that we had the resources, the training, and a system, which is the incident command system, to handle a large-scale incident. This very large stack had just collapsed, injuring over 20 people and entrapping several other students. So my concern was it going to shift again?
When I made my first pass around, I noticed that there were already some deceased students. I recognized that and decided to keep going around the stack. And that's when I saw Tim Curley Jr. on the stack.
It looked like he was on the second level of the stack, and his upper part of his body was visible, and he was able to talk to the rescue workers.
Hey, bud, let me take a look at you.
I'm okay here. I'm just stuck. There's a girl or a guy down there.
I remember coming up to Tim and just saying, "Are you okay?" And he said, "You know, I'm fine, but my buddies, my buddies below me, I need you to help them first."
Please, help my buddies first.
We'll be back around soon enough. You hang tight.
To have that kind of courage and that level of sympathy towards his fellow student workers, to be able to take his life and say, "I'm okay," treat those people first. It took a lot of courage, and it just spoke highly of who Tim Curley was.
Now, I remember looking down, and I didn't at first see anybody, but realized at that time there was likely some pretty sizable entrapments we were about to deal with.
Yeah, like 5 more yards, and then to your left.
I was having trouble breathing, and for me, I thought it was my asthma flaring up. I didn't consider that it could be anything else.
Hey, can you hear me? Yeah, I can't breathe.
I can remember him saying, "I'm gonna die, I can't breathe. I can't breathe." And I said, "No, you're not gonna die," and if I remember right, he was face down in the dirt. And he told me he had asthma. And I thought, there's nothing I can do. He's trapped, and there is nothing I can do. Shortly after that, we found John Comstock. We knew he was pretty bad. He was trapped. He was going to be there. He was going to be a tough one to get out because he was on the bottom. He was on the bottom, and he was on the bottom of the worst side. There was a lot of logs up above him, a lot of logs.
There was no way I was going to get out of there. I could not see anybody. It's not a visual memory, it's all audio. Talked with a preacher, and came up and said, "Hello, my name is, I am a Catholic preacher." Which was funny because I didn't really want that. Because he's like, "Did you want last rites?" And I'm like, "No, absolutely not, I don't want last rites. I don't want to die. Give me a blessing, but you say a prayer, but, I really don't want last rites,
He was kind of stuck in there on the outer edge, and you could see his arm and his leg and part of his body, but you couldn't see the whole thing. So he didn't know what injuries he had really and to the extent of it. I can remember just talking to him because we wanted to keep him calm and keep his mind off of what was going on. We couldn't get an oxygen mask on him because there was actually a limb across his face. And so I can remember having to cut the oxygen tubing, just feeding the tubing into him.
I'm putting this tube near your mouth. It'll get you some oxygen. Just breathe easy as you can.
Just to get him, a little fresh air because there was so much dirt and just real fine dirt in the air and just everywhere.
They had started an IV. I was really mumbling. My jaw couldn't even really move to talk. And ended up kind of tapping out my phone numbers to people so that they could notify my family.
And luckily he had an easy number. He wanted us to call his mom and make sure that she knew he was alive. I actually got to talk to his mom and tell her, okay, yes, he's stuck in Bonfire. We're trying to rescue him out of Bonfire, and it's going to be a while before we get him out.
Hello, is this the Comstock residence?
If I'm in that situation, if my family's in that situation, whether you're going to die or whether you're going to live, I don't want you to be alone. nobody wants to die alone. We had never met before, we weren't friends, but you feel like you're the only person that is there, and you're their friend for that moment.
Yeah, I'm fine right here. I'm just stuck.
If you don't let us get you out of here, you're keeping someone else buried, understand?
Tim Curley was on top of the stack, more facing the command post. I don't know how many people he told, but he didn't just tell one person. He was making it a point that I'm okay, treat other people first, and then come back and get me.
You're in a lot more pain than you let on. They're going to give you something for that at the hospital, all right?
His entrapment was in a way that it did allow them to take one of those airbags up to the stack and then slide it between a log to lift it, to free him, to move him out, to a backboard and into the ambulance.
Easy now.
Everybody there knew that parents were going to get a phone call.
The phone rang at about 4:30 in the morning. When you've got a child, your heart just kind of jumps to your throat. Tim had been hurt on the bonfire, and he had a broken arm, possibly some other injuries. And at first I was like, okay, Tim, you knew we were coming down for Thanksgiving. You just wanted us there a few days early. And I came out of the shower, and my husband was sitting on the side of the bed just sobbing. And I said, honey, it's okay. It's just a broken arm. And he shook his head no. He couldn't even talk. And I went, what's wrong? Did the doctor call again? And he nodded his head yes. And he got out a few words. Broken hip, internal injuries, in shock, critical condition. And at that point, I sat on the bed too and just held him, and we just sobbed. It changed our lives forever.
That was the first time that I actually saw how difficult of a task they had.
Feeling of helplessness that we have to take one log off at a time.
The only thing I could think of to say was, if I don't make it, tell my family I love them.
One hour into the rescue, I was busy trying to think about all the logistics for setting up the first press conference. What we had not provided was the number of students who had died, and we knew that we were going to have to share that with the world. For 90 years, they had successfully built this bonfire. There was no reason in anyone's mind to think that a tragedy of this magnitude was ever going to happen. Students certainly got scratches and splinters, but for this level of injuries and death, it was the farthest thing from anyone's mind. No one could see it coming.
For more on the tragedy, we return to College Station and Channel 8's John McKay. John?
Gloria and Scott, the digging and rescue effort continues behind me. This log pile, we're told now, is still a bit on the unstable side. In fact, the numbers you gave at the top of the hour of 9 people dead, 28 injured, those numbers continue. We should add that there are 2 people apparently that are still trapped inside. That's the information we have been told. We have no indication yet of what their condition may be.
Bill and John were trapped relatively close to each other on the stack. They were pinned extremely tight, with Bill being essentially what was behind John during the recovery phase.
The first 27 were transported within the first hour. These last 2 were going to be very extended.
It was a roller coaster because, there were times when you knew we're going to save another person's okay. And then, sometimes she would get angry when, we would be very quiet and the first responders would use this audio equipment to see if somebody was there and they wouldn't hear anything. And through all this, you were tired. It was a mix of emotions that is so hard to describe because you felt every emotion imaginable.
For the latest on what's going on in College Station, let's go to Channel 8's Valerie Williams.
The bonfire was 3/4 of the way finished, and student crews were almost 45 feet in the air when the first hint of trouble sounded.
I would go from the media to the incident command, back to the media, back to the incident command, trying to gather information. My secretary came up to me at one point and said, "Give me your clipboard." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Look around you." And there were 6,000 young people on their knees praying. Everything that I said was going to have meaning to the families of the victims and the young people who had been lost. And so, as I spoke, whatever I said, I knew that I had to keep those families and those young people in my mind.
I think what stood out to me most was people holding their hands and just saying, "We're going to get you out of here. It's going to be okay." And the feeling of helplessness, you know, we have to take one log off at a time to get to these guys.
I didn't know at the time how much Darren Allen was trying to help me. He was the one that spent most of the time with me that night and really kept me going and checking in on me those every 15 minutes to make sure that I was still okay. One of the most immediate things for me was for them to get that log off my head. So they used an 18-wheeler airbag and lifted up the log that was on top of my head. And once they did that, I was able to turn my head to the side and look out at the firemen who literally had to have their heads to the ground to see, with their flashlight to see me. I finally got a wet rag from one of the firemen, and I was able to get the dirt out of my eyes.
When we got to the hospital, it was a fairly small hospital, so they were out of exam rooms. We were just kind of left in the hallways, and they came and took me to x-ray and found out I just had a cervical sprain to my neck, and then they just parked me back in the hallway. When I was waiting, that was kind of when I started really realizing that, you know, there were a lot of people hurt. You know, that's kind of when you start saying, well, where's so-and-so, where's so-and-so? They decided to release me from the hospital. They made no attempt to clean up my scrapes or my abrasions. They just made sure that my neck was good and sent me on my way. My mom showed up and went into mom mode. She stripped off all my clothes and put me in the shower and washed my hair, and she made an attempt to start on my face because I had splinters and dirt and rocks stuck in my face. I started really realizing that, you know, there were a lot of people hurt and everybody kind of just got scattered to the wind.
Tim was on the stack for about 2 hours before they were able to get him down. It was like when you're little and you play pickup sticks, got to move one without affecting the others. That's kind of how it was with them with the crane and moving the log, so it took a while. Tim had made it through the night, but the doctor came in that day, and that's when he told us about the toxins building up in his body, that he would not be able to survive. An amputation was out of the question because of his severe injuries. He'd never make it through the trauma. And so my husband said, I know where he's going. I know he's going to heaven. And he said, I don't want him to go through hell to get there. We went into the hospital room. We had to tell him that he wasn't going to make it. I looked at him and I said, "Son, you don't have to fight anymore. It's okay. You can let go and go home to be with the Lord." And about a minute later, we see tears streaming down his face. And I said, "Honey, I know you've got everything in the world to look forward to. It doesn't make sense, but you are going to love heaven so much more. And I know you're worried about your dad and me, because we are the Three Musketeers. It's going to be really hard on us, but we're going to make it. I promise you we'll make it. And then one day we'll get to be with you." Those tears that came that initial time were the only tears he shed. He accepted the fact that he was going to go and be with the Lord, and we were going to make it.
A lot of people were requesting in any multi-casualty incident, they want to know exactly how many are injured and how many have been killed. And a lot of times you don't want to release that information until you have accurate statistics. But at that point, we had a really good idea that there were at least 8 and more people in the stack. Some of the news media were only reporting 2 or 3. You know, we knew, and it was overwhelming to think that, you know, at some point the actual number was going to be released and everybody was going to know just how tragic of an event it was.
When a body was located, they would wrap it in a white shroud and they would bring it out of the stack for every single body. Everyone who was working at the site, they formed a line on each side, a pathway, if you will, out of respect as the body was removed. In the weeks that followed, I would dream about cocoons coming out of a forest, just floating. And I thought, what are you dreaming about? Cocoons coming out of a forest? And then it dawned on me. It seemed endless that night, body after body after body, being pulled from those stacks, wrapped in those white shrouds. I don't think a week has gone by in my life that I haven't thought of that night.
John, still with me?
Darren was on the backside of the bonfire, and his main role was to provide patient care to Comstock as far as, you know, getting whatever patient care that he could to him. Because again, there wasn't a lot of his body showing. I went back to check in, and that was the first time that I actually saw how difficult of a task they had.
There's something in my back. It's depressing.
When the bonfire fell, it created a kind of a small cavern, and you could see into it, and you could see one of the students that had been killed was in there.
I can remember crawling in there, and I could look up, and there's actually two of the students that were that had been crushed and were dead inside there.
They were doing sound tests, and they were trying to see if there was anybody else trapped, so they needed quiet. But they also needed me to be listening as well, to notify them if I heard anything, any creaking, or, you know, if you hear anything moving or shifting, you know, tell us immediately so that we can stop what we're doing.
John Comstock was only a matter of feet from my head, and before they could get to him, they had to get to me. By this point, it had been roughly 4 hours, so about 6:30 in the morning. One of the firefighters actually went into the cavern, and then army crawled to find my feet.
It's Bill, right? Let me know if this hurts.
He said, lift your head, I'm gonna try to pull you out.
Sorry. You okay?
Okay.
I knew where my elbow was, I knew where my hand was, I knew enough to know what was going on, and pulling my legs wasn't gonna get me out of there, but he wanted to try.
I'm pretty stuck.
Okay.
My femur was shattered, and I remember screaming at him.
What can you move?
I can move my right arm out a bit. I can feel something above me.
What do you feel?
I'm not sure.
Stop it. Don't touch that, okay?
Okay.
We're gonna take our airbags down and try placing them differently. You just hold tight, okay?
There was a point, Bill was getting pretty upset, and I think he was in a lot of pain too. He was pinned forward from what I understand.
If I could move my arm, just a little room.
It was difficult to hear other people struggling in that situation. But he was saying, like, you know, if I could just get my arm free, I can get out of here. And, you know, I was thinking to myself, like, I really don't want to hear this because I am completely trapped. Like, you know, my arm is trapped, my hips are trapped, I can't even feel my legs are probably trapped.
Oh, you're in a spot.
I eventually got to the point where, you know, no blood supply to the right arm. It started to get extremely painful. I never could feel my legs, so I didn't really know at that point if I was paralyzed or, you know, or what.
How much longer?
And they just would always say, a little bit longer, just a little bit longer.
Keep saying that.
I didn't know how long it was going to take. So I'd have to tell him, we're getting close. We're going to get you out of here. We're getting close. We're getting close.
And I eventually got to the point where I said, you know, you keep telling me a little bit longer, but it's been a long time. I need you to tell me how long to go, and that's what I'll do. They hesitated a little bit, and they were like, well, we still have one other guy to get out, but it's probably going to take about an hour. And I said, okay, you have an hour.
These logs weighed thousands of pounds. I later learned that they had the weight of 2 747 jumbo jets fully loaded with fuel, baggage, and people. It was enormous.
At a certain point, it doesn't really matter how much it weighs, because it's enough to pretty much just crush you. They were positive that my pelvis was going to be in 1,000 pieces, because I was literally as flat as a pancake at the waist.
They have what's called an airbag, and it's what I understand is it's like a 2x2 grid, just rubber grid that you inflate with an oxygen tank, but it can lift the back corner of a standard fire truck.
Okay, everybody back.
What they did was they stacked 2 airbags. Their concern was when these things inflate, they round. And what they were worried about was the 2 inflated airbags slipping off each other.
Bill, I'm gonna pull on your feet again.
When they started to inflate the second airbag, I knew my elbow was out.
I'm out. I'm out.
I just remember them dragging me out of there.
I thought he died. I thought he died. Because I talked to him, and he told me he was gonna die. And he told me he couldn't breathe. So I thought he had died. I didn't know, and this is the first time that I found out that he didn't die. I'm crying because I'm happy. I mean, that's amazing.
Scott, the digging and rescue effort continues behind me.
When Bonfire fell, I was trapped under there for 4 hours. They got me out, got me to the hospital. I remember them getting me in the ambulance and cutting all my clothes off. And then as soon as my clothes were off, I remember being really, really cold. I remember them stretching this really paper-thin foil-looking blanket over me that really didn't help much, but up until that point, I was conscious the entire time. I remember closing my eyes at one point on the way to the hospital. Next time I wake up, I'm being wheeled in the hospital. I remember seeing the front entrance, being kind of pushed into a room, and then closing my eyes. Next time I open my eyes, I try to lift my head to look around, and I hear somebody up above my head say, "Hey, don't move your head, I'm stitching you up." I didn't know what was happening to me. I didn't know what had happened to me. Things had paused for me. The world kept going. The grief was mounting, the confusion, the frustration. Every time they found somebody else in Stack that passed away. All of the emotions going on, the media that was surrounding it all.
This is a tragedy that no one saw coming, that no one could have prevented. It's something that's never happened before, and it came out of the blue.
What happened here and how did this happen? A lot of people are wondering why is the main question. There's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of anger, and there's more than anything sadness.
They think they found everyone that's still alive. Miranda's still missing. You know what that means.
I saw my friend Amy. She said, you know, Miranda's missing. And at this point, you know, everybody that was gonna be found alive probably would have been found. And so she said, you know what that means, right? I kind of just looked at her. I really didn't say anything. And because I was just surprised because I hadn't really gotten any update. And she said, she's gone. And I just kind of looked at her and I was like, okay, just because I was in such shock.
Channel 8's Valerie Williams. The bonfire was 3/4 of the way finished. Student crews were almost 45 feet in the air.
I got like halfway up the first staircase and just collapsed on the stairs.
Miranda she was the happy one. She and I connected in a lot of ways. She was always happy, always smiling. I remember my mom telling me Miranda had passed away.
The night before, I'd spoken at Miranda's dorm, talking about what was going on in student government. I remember saying hello to her and shaking her hand. You realize how fleeting life is.
I'm not sure if I ever really, like, grieved properly. You know, I didn't really ever get a chance to say goodbye to Miranda. I was so young, you know, and I'd only been at school for 2.5, 3 months. And to have to deal with the death of a friend, it's just not what you expect.
At 20, 21 years old, that was hard to deal with. Anybody who had anything to do with that event grew up that night. I think the entire Aggie family grew up that night.
John Comstock, his rescue was the most difficult out of all of them because he was so far trapped in the site that it was going to require a great deal of time and resources to free him.
I need to know how much longer.
Most people think, like, I never gave up. This is not true. At about the 6-hour mark, now the fireman was constantly asking me, give me a thumbs up, John. I didn't want the emergency crew to know that I was ready to die. So every 15 minutes or so, when they would ask me to give them a thumbs up, I would. But ultimately, I was completely exhausted. The pain surpasses a 10. And I tried to close my eyes, and for whatever reason, I could not fall asleep. People love to talk, angels or something divine like that, but whatever it was, it just prevented me from falling asleep. Closed my eyes, most tired I've ever been in my life, and I couldn't fall asleep. Everything just stopped for about 5 minutes. But it kind of gave me what I needed to make it that last hour. One of the firemen had said, I think if we can start cutting out these logs here and remove these sections of wood, that we can get to them. I was never really sure I was going to make it until they took off the piece of wood that was kind of one of the logs that was directly above me. And the sun had come up by that point. And when he pulled that log off, I could see light. And I was just like, I'm gonna make it. I was trapped for roughly about 7.5 hours. One of the firemen said, I think if we just lift up right here, I can pull them out. And so a bunch of firemen got themselves up around where I was, and they counted 1, 2, 3, and they lifted up, grabbed me by my left arm, and dragged me right out. 1, 2, 3. They immediately got me strapped into the gurney.
And there they are, bringing that person, we can only hope and pray that they are alive up to this point, out of the pile of logs, loaded onto the gurney, and they will soon be taking that person away to the hospital.
Give them a thumbs up so they know you're okay.
Who's they?
And I gave him a little gig-em, and this crowd just cheered and just was, I mean, amazing, amazing.
And this is likely the person we have been talking about all morning. Officials at the university say the person was conscious, responsive, and receiving IV fluids. And that person, we just received confirmation that person is alive. That was the one person that they have been talking to and talking through all morning long.
I was the last person that they pulled out of the bonfire.
At 9 a.m., the morning of the bonfire collapse, the last survivor was removed from the stacks. But it was not going to be for almost another 24 hours from the moment of the collapse that the last body was removed from the stack. 27 young people were pulled from that stack alive, and 12 were pulled who had died.
Right now, the operation is slowly shutting down. We're done.
It was probably around 2 o'clock in the morning the following day in which I held the final press conference on site. There were still about 3,000 young people surrounding in the distance. And I knew that I had to go and tell them that it was over. But how do you tell them? They had been keeping vigil for 24 hours. I guess it came to me, and I said, on behalf of the university, I just want to thank you for praying for the families, for the young people, for the rescue workers. From the bottom of our heart, we just can't tell you how much we appreciate it. And I kept repeating that. And at some point, I was in the middle of the crowd. And out of the crowd came a young man's voice. To this day, I don't know who he was. And he said, "You don't get it, do you?" And I turned in the direction. I never saw him. I only heard his voice. And he said, "We were also praying for you." And I got it. In that moment, I became part of that wonderful Aggie family. It became a part of me.
I think one of my colleagues said it best. We gave all we had, we did all we could, and then we just cried, because that's all we could do. I stayed out at the site until I was told to go home and go to sleep. I didn't want to leave till the last victim came out. When I left, I just remember getting in my car and crying as I drove away. I thought that I'd given it my all and I'd done the best I could, and somehow I felt like I might have fallen short in some way.
All said and done, I broke both my cheekbones, cracked my upper jaw, punctured and collapsed my right lung, lacerated my liver, shattered my elbow, shattered my femur, cracked my pelvis, cracked my wrist, and had cut my forehead to the skull. Was about 21 days in the hospital.
They rolled me right into the ER, and the doctor looked at me and said, "I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to put you down now because I have to do surgery on you." And the only thing I could think of to say was, if I don't make it, tell my family I love them.
So I got off duty that morning, and then I went to the hospital and actually met John's mom. He had actually coded on the table, and they'd gotten him back, and he coded again, and he gotten him back. And I think he coded like 13 times.
They put me under November 18th, and I didn't wake up until New Year's.
Doctors say John has been unconscious and in critical condition now for 12 days. He was among the many students hospitalized the morning of November 18th when the A&M bonfire collapsed.
I went every day to sit with his mother, and she allowed me to go in and see him. He's unconscious, sedated and in a coma, until a day that a nurse stopped me. I was on duty that day, and the nurse stopped me at the doors, and she said, "You don't want to see John today?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "No, not today. You don't want to see him. He's awake." And she said, "No, because he doesn't want anything to do with anybody that saved him."
I had one very bad day in the hospital. I actually realized that my leg had been amputated alone in my room. And then when my mom came in the room, I said, "Hey, what happened to my leg?" And she explained that because my left ankle was crushed, the bones were rotting from the inside out, and that I was going downhill, and I was going downhill fast. And so the decision to amputate was made. I think that day hit Darren Allen very hard because he was coming every day to see me, and when he came that day, the nurse told him, today is not the day to see him.
And I understood, but that was a real hard thing. So I turned around and walked out and never went back. Years later, I went and saw Bonfire Site, and then they had a memorial set up, and somebody had asked me who I was and what I had to do with Bonfire. And, I told them I was fireman for the city, and I was on one of the first trucks there that night and had worked with John for the longest. And then there was a guy that came up to me and he said, I want to introduce somebody. I want to introduce somebody to you. And they brought John in. And he wheeled up with his wheelchair. And he said, I could hear your voice. I could hear your voice, and I knew who you were. You're the voice that I remember of that night. And it was just such a sense of relief and closure, and getting to talk to him, and just, you know, and him said, he was in that room the whole time, and he said, I could hear your voice. And I remember you laid with me, and you kept me alive.
There were 2 different times in the months that followed where I actually wrote a press release stating that John had died because it was that imminent. He embodied an individual who not only had survived, but who had risen up against all the odds. I told John that I had written his obituary twice, that I had framed it, and that the day he could walk up to my office, I would hand it to him. And about a year later, he did. I have a picture of that. It still sits in my office in Chicago.
I never wondered if Bonfire would ever fall or what would happen. That thought never crossed my mind. We had done it for 90-something times. There had never been a major significant injury or catastrophe.
This was going to be our second to last shift. So we were only going to have like one more time to go out there and complete stack before it was going to be burned. I was so excited to see this thing go. I mean, I had never seen anything like this before. I think I had even said, I wish I could light it. I mean, can you imagine? I think losing your leg, it's not an easy thing. It takes a lot of kind of soul searching to finally get past that, because you're never going to get it back. I mean, you have to come to terms with that. I wouldn't go back and change things. I am who I am, and I'm happy with that. Like, I accept that. I can accept myself without a leg forever.
Invariably amass some form of, having been through all that, although it was extremely painful and difficult to deal with physically and emotionally, I'm a better person for it. They gave me an extra semester to finish up my final exams, and 3 years after that, I graduated Texas A&M and started my career, started life.
Tim died at exactly 8 p.m. on November 19th. He had lived about 42 and a half hours after the accident. A measure of a person's life is not only, I think, in how they live, but in how they die. And he definitely died with honor. We have this pot and, you know, other memorabilia. And to me, the pot reflects the adventuresome spirit that our son had. He wanted to be where the action was and right in the middle of it.
Although he paid the ultimate price with his life through that accident, he did it with dignity and courage and unselfishness. And if we can take an ounce of Tim Curley and put him in our hearts and our lives, we'll be doing pretty good.
Miranda chose me to be her successor for co-chair for the Mosier Hall. You know, she was an awesome person. I mean, she saw something in me that she respected and thought that I would be a good leader, and it's kind of made me try to be a better person in her honor, to try to live my life maybe the way that she would have.
When I think of these 12 Aggies that died that night, I want to celebrate their lives and do those things that they can't do anymore as a tribute to their lives. And that's something that I talk to a lot of people about.
They were doing something they believed in, and they were doing something they loved. And I believe that if it's your time, it's your time. Why did it have to happen? It changed a lot of people that night. It changed a lot of kids that night. It made a lot of kids men that night.
It was a wonderful tradition that did, in fact, create a sense of commonality, a bond between generation of Aggies. But to have it on campus, as great of a tradition as it was, the risk of even losing one life is too great. You look at tragedies like this, and you can't make sense of them. Why is it that two students are standing on a stack of logs, and one dies, and the other one doesn't even get a splinter? You only get to see in this moment a piece of the puzzle. But someday on the other side, we'll have our answer.
Crews were dispatched immediately, and the father told us that he was in the bathroom with his two children. There was smoke in the building, and he was obviously in fear of his life.
As firefighters arrived, they spotted the 999 caller was now out on the roof at the back of the home.
Sitting on a flat roof, potentially with a fire underneath you, is extremely dangerous.
They don't get more serious than that. There's a family in danger, in a fire, and they have to give 110% to save that family.
The man and his children were brought down to safety, but the children's mother was still believed to be inside.
We're aware there's still somebody to rescue, so the urgency is high. The firefighting crew entered the area and identified a body that had been burnt. There was clear evidence, due to the amount of burning, that she was a fatality.
The body was identified as 34-year-old mother of two, Kirsty Wilson.
The intensity of burning was quite localized, leaving the rest of the property relatively unscathed, apart from some smoke damage. And that is unusual.
Was this a tragic accident? Was it something more sinister?
Kirsty Wilson was a vibrant, outgoing, vivacious, sociable woman with a great sense of humour who was exceptionally good at her job. Her mother described her as a woman who turned heads, and anybody who met her loved her as a person as well as a great friend and colleague.
Talking to people that knew Kirsty, she was vibrant, she was energetic, she was colourful, she was passionate, she had everything to live for.
In 1999, Kirsty met 31-year-old Alan Jeremy.
Kirsty and Alan both worked in the motor vehicle industry. Kirsty worked for Mercedes, Alan worked for Volkswagen. Alan was quiet, he was introvert, he was intense, very private individual, very different to Kirsty.
Despite their differences in personality, the pair hit it off. They moved in together and welcomed two children.
6 or 7 years into their relationship, they seemed to be an ideal couple. A lovely house in a very smart part of Surrey, and two kids, and two very good jobs. but there was a clear difference between the lifestyle and between their own personalities. He was a black belt in martial arts. He spent almost all his time, certainly all his spare time, keeping fit, doing practices, and just working out constantly, which his family played no part in.
After 8 years together, Alan and Kirsty began to drift apart.
In the spring of 2007, Kirsty begins to develop feelings for her boss at work.
She had known him since she joined the company as a graduate trainee, and little by little he seemed to be getting closer to her, and she seemed to be getting closer to him.
Unbeknownst to Alan Jeremy, the pair began a relationship.
Kirsty and her boss spend an increasing amount of time together, and they're really forming quite a deep relationship.
Here was a man she could admire and she could love.
But not long into the couple's affair, their secret relationship was nearly exposed.
Jeremy discovered a text that the boss had sent Kirsty privately saying, "I wish I was with you now," and his suspicions immediately came to life. Kirsty's explanation, this was nothing more than some mild flirting.
Despite his suspicions, Jeremy accepted her explanation. Kirsty and her boss's relationship continued to develop.
They were very excited about the future. They were very much in love with each other, and they had everything to look forward to. Kirsty had obviously kept that quiet for some time.
Kirsty's boss was married at that time, but he increasingly decided that his life surely lay with Kirsty. And so he took steps himself to end his relationship with his wife so that he would be available, hopefully in his eyes, to take up with a new life with Kirsty. Kirsty had to take steps along similar lines.
Kirsty decides to break the news to Alan that she wants a separation, but she doesn't tell him the exact circumstances about why.
She was somewhat concerned about how Alan would accept the news that she wanted to enter into a relationship with her boss, and so she broke it to him in stages.
Although there was no history of violence in the relationship, Kirsty had warned her boss about what Alan Jeremy might be capable of.
She knew that he was a martial arts black belt, and she knew that if he lost his temper, then he could seriously hurt her if he wanted to. Alan Jeremy and Kirsty were living together in the same house, but they were living separate lives.
After Kirsty confronts Alan about the separation, she wants to sleep in separate rooms, but Alan insists that they have to stay in the same room so as not to confuse the children. I think that this is Alan trying to remain in control of a situation that he feels increasingly out of control over.
He changed into the model partner. He was basically spending a lot more time at home. He was doing a lot more around the house. He was cooking. He was hoping that he could win her back and win her affections back and change her mind.
By the time she's approached Alan about ending the relationship, she's already fallen for someone else, and it's now just that Alan is catching up.
Despite Alan's best efforts, Kirsty made it clear the relationship was over.
Kirsty and Alan continue living together and co-parenting their children, and over these months it seems that Alan's coming to terms with the end of this relationship, and they're both looking to move on.
Alan Jeremy wrote a letter to Kirsty almost to confess that he had been the cause of the failure of their relationship.
The letter was basically thanking her for all the good times they'd spent together, for the happy times they'd had, but appreciating that she needed to move on.
He claimed that he was now over everything and was looking for a new relationship with other people himself.
Alan said that he had joined Match.com. He'd also changed his Facebook profile, so he was now a single person. He was saying to everybody that he accepted the breakup. He appreciated that they'd grown apart, that they were going to be adult about it. and that basically he would move on with his life.
In August 2008, the couple agreed to put their house up for sale.
They'd had the house decorated in preparation to do that, and for all intents and purposes, they were going their separate ways, and as we understood it, fairly amicably.
However much Alan Jeremy wanted to give the outward impression that he was acting as a grown-up and accepting the inevitable and reacting in the right way, there was still part of him who still thought he could win Kirsty back. So the first moves to sell the house by putting it on the market must have led to a seminal moment in Alan Jeremy's brain. At this moment, the reality he'd been trying to put off was now the truth.
Kirsty broke the news to Jeremy that she was seeing another man.
Kirsty had made it clear that she was going to be in a relationship with her boss. She had also told Alan that there was a party coming up that she and her boss were going to attend, that they were going to be together at the party, and that they were going to spend the night together after the party.
Whilst he's appearing to be supportive and accepting of the separation, this has got to be quite overwhelming for Alan.
She was about to leave him for a new life with her boss. This must have come as a hammer blow to Alan Jeremy's hopes and dreams. Before the house was due to go on the market, suddenly fire breaks out in the house.
I'm rescue.
Hello, I've got smoke in my house. I've got 2 young children in the house.
Are you able to get everybody out of the property?
I'm upstairs. The fire was downstairs. I'm not sure it was.
Room?
Yeah. Come in, sweetie.
Are you all going into the bathroom?
Yeah. Right, shut.
You shut the door. Okay.
Yeah.
Have you got a towel or something in there?
Yeah.
Can you soak it under the door?
Yeah, any water, sweetheart, any water. Okay, good girl, good girl.
It's at the bottom of the door you've blocked up there.
Oh, just, yeah.
Yeah, that'll just prevent any smoke going
Right, put it
in
up
for
behind the
you.
door. The only thing is, I don't know where my partner is.
Right. Do you think she's in the house? Or?
Yeah, I went to bed early.
The information we've received is a person's reported fire. They don't get much more serious than that. The urgency to get there is at utmost, but they're also aware that they will be risking their lives and seconds count. It's all about speed, it's all about urgency, it's all about saving life. Their search quicker.
When firefighters entered the living room, they discovered Kirsty's body.
The smoke was clearing at this stage, and it became evident to the crew that the extent of damage and burns to the casualty was quite severe, and that the chances of the casualty being alive were very remote. I think firefighters in particular always go through a little bit of soul searching, thinking, could we have saved that person? But I think in this particular case, that was tempered by the fact that Kirsty was clearly dead before we arrived. There was significant burning to the face, upper torso, and there was limited fire damage in and around the body, which indicated that the fire was localised on Kirsty as opposed to Kirsty becoming a victim of fire spread.
When paramedics arrived, Kirsty Wilson was pronounced dead at the scene.
Whenever someone dies in a fire, police are always called. It's our job working with the fire service to investigate how the fire started, but more importantly, how someone came to die, to understand whether that was a tragic accident or something more.
Alan Jeremy and his 2 children were taken to hospital as a precaution.
But I recall that a lot of the people that were first at the scene made a comment that ultimately Alan was very calm, very relaxed at the scene, and the ambulance crew made remarks that Alan mentioned nothing about Kirsty on the way to the hospital.
This is unusual as someone who's just gone through a traumatic loss of an ex-partner and the mother of your children. However, it's not enough to immediately, on its own, cause red flags when everyone responds to trauma in very different ways.
At Jermy's home, police and fire personnel inspected the scene.
There were some things that were very concerning very quickly.
On our arrival, there was some smoke in the road, but it wasn't billowing out of the building. It was more like a thick, moderate fog than a billowing, dense black fire that the crews were prepared for.
The fire was very localised to the lounge. Certainly no evidence of a lot of smoke damage in the property, so that clearly didn't add up.
One firefighter memorably described it as nothing worse than a smoke-filled barroom in a pub during the days when you were allowed to smoke indoors.
With the fire under control, police and firefighters looked for a possible cause.
In looking into a fire, there now becomes the possibility of a criminal process, and therefore the police lead on that.
It's our job to work with the fire service in particular to investigate that fire, find out how it started, and find out ultimately how Kirsty has come to die.
There was clearly a slight smell of accelerant or some kind of fuel-based smell. There was no evidence of smoking material near Kirsty. We would look at potential electrical causes. There was no electrical causes near Kirsty, and therefore we now can only look at Kirsty. There was limited fire damage in and around her body. There was limited damage on the carpets and furniture, but her body was quite seriously burnt, and that is unusual. To me, it looked like it was a deliberate fire.
And the positioning of Kirsty's body raised further questions.
It looks like she's been specifically positioned to look as though she's fallen asleep whilst watching TV, with a pillow under her head.
Now, if she was overcome with fumes and was trying to fight for her life, surely she would have been on her hands and knees trying to escape. This seemed a very strange, almost posed posture for a woman in a smoke-filled room.
With the physical evidence pointing to foul play, paramedics at the scene also had some concerns.
I vividly remember at least one of them saying that from their experience, they believed Kirsty may have been dead longer than the timeline in terms of the 999 call would suggest. So at this point, I believe Kirsty's been killed, and this is a murder investigation.
4 hours after calling 999, Alan Jermy was taken into custody and questioned about Kirsty's death.
We've only got a certain amount of time with Alan in custody, so it's important that we get as much information from him as possible. At this point, we've still got an open mind. It's really important to say that at the end of the day, we're trying to prove or disprove whether Alan has been involved.
Jermy put forward his version of what happened the night that Kirsty died.
According to Alan, he gives his daughters dinner. They all watch Disney Channel for a little while before he takes the girls to bed.
Alan Jermy went out at about 8:30 or thereabouts to fill up his car with petrol and to draw out some money from the cash machine. He'd then gone back home and basically sat with Kirsty.
He then went to bed, leaving Kirsty downstairs watching Big Brother.
And that was the last time that he'd seen her.
Alan Jermy told the police that as far as he was concerned, an intruder must have broken into the house, murdered Kirsty, and set fire to the house.
He was adamant that he hadn't been responsible for the death of his partner.
We are looking and have an open mind to looking at other lines of inquiry. I can't preclude that someone else is either responsible or has worked with Alan in killing Kirsty. I'm looking for any evidence that someone else had done this.
Alan Jermey's home, detectives looked for any evidence to support Alan's theory that someone else may have been responsible for Kirsty's death.
We've only got so much time with Alan in custody, and we might only have his house for a finite amount of time. And we need to try and, make sure we recover as much evidence as quickly as possible. There was no sign of any forced entry. Equally importantly, when I looked in the kitchen, there was cash. There was laptops, there were phones. Now, if someone had broken into the property, this was a burglary that had gone wrong as an example, why would you leave all those valuable possessions behind? Straight away, we're very concerned.
Police found no evidence to suggest that another person had been responsible and identified Alan Jermey as their prime suspect. Where in the property?
When we were searching the house, we found a stun gun in one of the bedrooms. A highly unusual item. Who has a stun gun in their house? I have no idea whose it was, whether it had been used, what it was for, but at that point I just knew that it was something that we had to take as part of our investigation.
Meanwhile, investigators looked to confirm Alan Jermey's timeline of events.
Once Alan told us he'd been to the petrol station, it's quite usual for us to try and corroborate that to see whether he's telling us the truth. The obvious way of doing that is looking at CCTV at the petrol station, which we did obtain, and it did show Alan at the petrol station at the time he said. Interestingly, what we were able to see, not just what he did, but what he was wearing.
There was CCTV from the petrol station showing that when he filled the car up with petrol, he was wearing black jogging bottoms and a white t-shirt.
What was interesting about that is that when we searched the house, that evening, that morning, we found those tracksuit bottoms in the washing machine and they'd been washed. For me, that was really interesting. Why would you take your tracksuit bottoms off that you'd had on that evening and just put those in the wash cycle? What were you trying to hide?
Police suspect Jermey may have been attempting to destroy evidence.
The jogging bottoms were tested by scientists who did discover some hydrocarbons, which was indicative that they might have been associated with petrol.
Jermey's story suggested he had returned home from the petrol station at around 9 p.m., 3 hours before emergency services were called.
One thing we will typically do in any murder investigation is look at phones, use of phones, in particular Kirsty's phone. I found that Kirsty's phone had sent a text that evening to her boss, her boyfriend, at about 9:10 that night. Her boss had replied at about 9:20.
He expected her reply, but it never came, and this was exceptionally unusual.
Alan made the 999 call just before midnight, at 9:20, and for several minutes afterwards, her boyfriend had texted her back, and there was no reply. At this point, I suspect that Kirsty was dead.
Detectives probed deeper into Kirsty and Jermey's relationship in the weeks preceding her death.
Alan had registered with a dating website or websites and had gone on some dates. So for anyone looking in from the outside, for all intents and purposes, Alan was accepting A, of the separation, and B, was moving on with his life.
However, just engagement in the dating process doesn't necessarily mean that someone's moved on from any hurt and difficult feelings they might have over a previous relationship. He wanted to set it up like he's taking the positive steps that he needs to move on from the end of this relationship.
From our investigation, we found that he'd penned a letter on the laptop that was quite to the contrary. It basically was a letter begging her not to go and that he wanted her back.
I think the police were deeply suspicious of Alan Jermey's claims that he had totally accepted the separation of their relationship because they believed that this was the motive for why Alan Jermey killed Kirsty.
Kirsty's friends spoke with police and revealed that she had raised some concerns about his behavior.
Despite Alan telling Kirsty he was fine with their separation and he'd written a letter to wish her all the best, she had her suspicions that he was spying on her. In fact, she even went as far as to tell friends that one evening she'd found him crawling around the bottom of her bed in the middle of the night and was checking her phone. The more we found out about Alan, it was really clear that he didn't want her to leave him. Alan wasn't comfortable with their separation, and more importantly, he didn't want her to be with anybody else.
I think it's entirely possible that as the practical elements of the separation are now all coming to a head, the house going on the market, him telling the parents, him having to tell the children, I think that these are the trigger points that secure to Alan that this is real and it is final. So this is building a picture of not the placid and accepting character that Alan's been trying to portray, and instead someone that is becoming increasingly paranoid and is actually causing fright to Kirsty now.
I think Kirsty had every reason to be frightened of Alan. He was a trained black belt martial arts expert. She knew that would he ever want to, he could hurt her very badly.
When we spoke to witnesses, neighbours, people that knew them, that neighbours had heard in the past arguments, which wasn't unsurprising given the fact that they were now separating. But what was really interesting, on the night of Kirsty's death, no one had heard any struggle, any arguments. There was certainly no signs of a disturbance in the house. There was no injuries to Kirsty, no wounds, anything that suggested there'd been a struggle. So it still raised the question, what had happened to Kirsty? How had she died?
Kirsty's body was sent for a post-mortem to establish what had caused her death.
Whilst Kirsty had some burns to her body, the fire hadn't taken enough to completely destroy the evidence. We know from examining Kirsty's body that there was evidence of strangulation. There was no soot in her airways, which meant she was killed before the fire had been set. And we also know there was no signs of any injuries or defence wounds. There'd been certainly no struggle before she'd died. So what we did know is that Kirsty had been strangled to death, and we also know the fire hadn't killed her. The fire had been set deliberately to destroy the evidence.
As the fire burned downstairs, Alan Jeremy called 999.
Fire rescue?
Hello, I've got smoke in my house and I've got two young children in the house.
Okay, you're able to get everybody out of the property?
I'm upstairs, the fire was downstairs. I'm not sure, there's just smoke coming from upstairs.
Right, okay, so you're not able to get out at the moment?
I'm not at the moment, and I've got two young children upstairs.
Someone who has committed a murder ringing 999. That's quite unusual. But what's even more unusual about that call is how rehearsed, perhaps, cold, calculated, callous Alan is in that call.
Okay, have you got a towel or something in there?
Yeah.
Can you soak it under the door?
Yeah, any water, sweetheart, any water. Okay, good girl, good girl.
Okay, and is that the bottom of the door you've blocked up there?
Oh, just, yeah, of course.
Yeah, that'll just prevent any smoke going
Right, put it up behind the door. Good girl, good girl.
For those children, it must have been a very distressing experience. They don't know what's going on, they don't know where their mother is. It's almost like he's using his daughters and their fear to add to the urgency and legitimacy that he's trying to present in the call.
This is a man who put his children's life at risk by setting fire to a house that, for all he knew, could have gone up like a tinderbox and put his children's lives in jeopardy.
The only thing is,
yeah,
I don't know where my partner is.
Right, do you think she's in the house? Or?
Yeah, I went to bed early.
It feels quite awkward when he introduces the information about his partner being inside, because it's done quite clumsily.
What's the name of your partner?
Kirsty.
Even when asked, is there anyone else in the house, having told the operator of his two daughters, it was some considerable time before he even got round to mentioning Kirsty being downstairs.
Throughout the whole call, he doesn't call out for Kirsty once. Doesn't scream her name. Doesn't shout out to see if she's okay. That's because he's killed her.
Alan Jermy was charged with murder.
Throughout his interviews, Alan denied any involvement whatsoever or any responsibility for Kirsty's death. He was cold, he was calm. For me, if I'm an innocent man who's been wrongfully arrested for the murder of my partner, I'm not so sure I would be as calm and as collected as he was.
Alan Jermy has a very structured and planned approach to this murder of Kirsty.
He clearly thought he'd get away with it. He set that fire hoping to destroy the evidence, hoping to kill Kirsty and to live his life with his two children, and no one would ever know.
However, the actual execution does not line up with that structured and planned approach. He's clearly someone who likes stability and control, and as the separation between him and Kirsty is becoming more finalized, and he's at risk of losing the life which he enjoys, perhaps the change of access to his daughters, this has all fueled him to take revenge.
Alan was clearly consumed by jealousy, and selfishly, rather than let anybody else have Kirsty, let her live her life, he took it.
In the summer of 2009, Alan Jermy faced trial, charged with the murder of Kirsty Wilson.
I remember the trial distinctly. Alan sat in the dock, and I remember he was still very, very calm, very cold, I would say, throughout, which had been consistent throughout our entire investigation. He denied any involvement still at this point in our murder. He hadn't admitted to a thing.
He seemed smug and lacking in showing any signs of emotional remorse. He wasn't showing any emotion for the loss of his long-term ex-partner, the mother of his children.
Alan Jermy took to the stand to put forward his side of the story.
His defence was that he fully accepted that Kirsty hadn't died as a result of smoke inhalation, that she had been either strangled or strangled and suffocated, but that he had not been responsible for it. He maintained the account that somebody else must have been responsible.
So somebody had walked into his property, no signs of any forced entry, no signs of any broken windows. They'd walked straight in, they'd found his petrol canister, they'd murdered Kirsty without any signs of a struggle, no disturbance. They'd set the fire and they'd left completely undetected. It was quite remarkable.
Under cross-examination, the prosecution looked for holes in Jermy's story.
It was part of Alan's account that he and Kirsty had watched Big Brother together.
What was interesting is I turned the TV on and saw the TV had been paused from the previous evening on a programme called Hannah Montana on the Disney Channel, which was a programme that Alan and Kirsty's children watched before they went to bed. That told me that Kirsty hadn't been watching telly after those children had gone to bed.
Prosecutors also drew attention to the jogging bottoms, which had shown traces of petrol. But under cross-examination, the defence landed an important blow.
The scientist who gave evidence about that conceded that because of the firefighters moving through the premises and through areas where petrol had been, and also when Mr. Jermy was filling his car at the petrol station, those hydrocarbons may have got there as a result of that, and not indicate that he'd been responsible for pouring the petrol in the scene.
The jury were told about the stun gun that was found at Jermy's home, as well as details of how it had been acquired.
We found evidence of a purchase for a stun gun from abroad. He'd done it in Kirsty's name. Why would you purchase a stun gun? More importantly, why would you purchase it in someone else's name?
The prosecution put it forward that it had been deliberately bought in her name to disguise the fact that it had been obtained, and that he had thought it would never have been discovered.
We subsequently found out later on that a package had been delivered to the property. I think it may have been found by one of Kirsty's parents. The package had been taken away by Alan. I suspected that was probably the stun gun, and he had told Kirsty it was DVD so that she didn't look for the package.
It suggests a level of pre-planning from Alan, where he has gone online, intentionally ordered these items and then hidden them from Kirsty.
But the defense told a different story.
A package had arrived addressed to Kirsty. Kirsty's father had given it to Alan. He claimed that he had never seen the stun gun, although he was aware she had spoken about getting one, because when they moved apart, she would be on her own and would need some form of protection.
The prosecution put forward their version of how Kirsty Wilson had died.
It was our case that Alan had subdued Kirsty, strangled Kirsty and set fire to the house. Whether he'd done that with the stun gun or whether he'd used his hands to do that, only Alan will know. But what we do know and what we did present to the jury is clearly Alan as a capable, strong, skilled martial artist who may have used those skills to incapacitate Kirsty.
The one unanswered question was, why was there no defence marks on Kirsty? The prosecution suggested that by stunning Kirsty, Jeremy could then throttle her with his hands. He could do it in a way that would leave minimum amount of evidence in terms of bruising on her throat. He then hoped that by covering her throat and neck area with extra amounts of petrol, that would then destroy the evidence. But because the fire did not catch as strongly as he had hoped and expected, the pathologist was still able to show that strangulation had taken place.
We made an application to exclude the stun gun because there was no evidence that it had actually been used in the course of the murder. That was only a theory put forward by the prosecution. But the judge ruled against that. That presented something of a difficulty for the defence. However, during the course of the trial, we'd made some impact in relation to the points that they made, being able to explain quite a few of them away. We dealt with the hydrocarbons. Basically, they didn't have any evidence that the stun gun had been used. There was good evidence that he loved her, that he loved his children, and that basically he had been sensible about the breakup and was coming to terms with it.
Following a 4-week trial, the jury retired for deliberations.
No one knows what a jury's verdicts will be except the 12 people who are making that decision.
That moment when the jury go out to consider their verdict, despite the evidence and no matter how well you've presented your case, you never take anything for granted, and ultimately it seems like an eternity.
After 5 hours of deliberations, the jury were ready to return their verdict.
Those moments, those seconds in court, you can hear a pin drop. But thankfully and rightfully in this case, the right verdict was delivered, and he was guilty.
Alan Jeremy was found guilty of the murder of Kirsty Wilson and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years.
The judge told Jeremy directly to his face, "How do you explain to 2 young children why they will never see their mother again?"
The things that will always stick with me with this case is the cold, calculated way in which Alan tried to hide his crime, how selfish he was in doing what he did, putting his children's lives at risk. But more than that, how he took away their mum.
Alan Jeremy will be eligible for parole in 2025.
If Alan Jeremy does get parole, I think if I was a family member, it would never be long enough, and he should never come out. We'll never know if that was premeditated, that murder, whether he'd spent weeks, days, hours planning what he was going to do to Kirsty. What we do know, though, is that after he'd killed her, and before he rang 999, he had several hours in which to think about what he would do next. Could he call the police and admit there'd been a terrible accident, something had gone terribly wrong? Or do you spend several hours thinking about how you are going to conceal your crime? He took Kirsty's life.
I met Brittany, I believe I was 15, she was 14. We became best friends, got to know each other, and been so close ever since.
She used to like to joke around a lot, laugh. Just her smile just made you smile back.
She was such a fun-loving girl and just smiling all the time.
April 22nd, 2009. It's spring break for high school students in Rochester, New York. And with a long winter barely behind them, 17-year-old Brittany Drexel is ready for some warm sunshine. It's a long-standing rite of passage in the Rochester area for high school seniors to spend part of the week-long break in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Just kids, no parental supervision.
There was about 30 or 40 kids going down to Myrtle Beach, and it's kind of a tradition for them to go down there. It's just like any other tourist area. You got hotels, you got shops. Those kids are going down there, drinking, doing drugs, partying, going out to night spots, and laying out on the beach.
Brittany, a high school junior, is friendly with some older kids who ask her to join them for the trip down to Myrtle Beach.
She had asked me if she could go to Myrtle Beach, and I had told her no. And I also told her, you need to talk to your father. I know he wouldn't have allowed her to go, but, you know, she still needed to talk to both of us. And, you know, Brittany, she liked to play both of us. If Mom said no, Dad said yes.
Dawn and Chad Drexel have recently decided to divorce. Their separation has taken a toll on Brittany and her two siblings.
That Tuesday, Dawn called, 8-ish or something at night, said, your daughter's not listening to me. She's bringing up this spring break. She wants to go down.
According to Chad, Brittany had recently been sleeping late and skipping school. In his mind, it was no time for her to be going on vacation without parental supervision.
So I told her, Brittany, what's going on? Where are you telling your mother that you want to go to spring break? You're not going anywhere. Silence. She didn't say nothing. Do you understand me, Brittany? Yeah.
The next afternoon, Wednesday, the dispute continues. Brittany is so upset, she storms out of the house. She calls her boyfriend, John Greco, and asks him to pick her up. John, who has been dating Brittany on and off for over 2 years, knows how much Brittany wants to get away for spring break.
Her junior year was a tough year for her. She was dealing with her family being in a divorce. Any problem that me and her would have would escalate the anxiety that she was carrying.
Brittany's close friend Tara has seen how hard junior year has been for her classmate.
She just wanted to hang out with her friends, just not have to stay home. She wanted to go away for spring break. She wanted to just be able to have fun for a week outside of Rochester.
In the months before her disappearance, Brittany has had her share of problems. She overdosed twice on her mom's pain medication. Both times are after a major breakup with John. Brittany's father believes she was feeling the strain of her parents' divorce as well.
In my heart, I felt like this is all my fault because I left the house and now all these things are happening. I went straight to the hospital. They pumped her. She didn't take as many as everyone thought. But that was a warning that I need help.
I could remember the look on her face. Her face was just all red, and she was just crying. Tears were just coming down her face, and I looked at her and I said, Britt, why would you do this? Why? Nothing in life is that bad to do this.
Brittany began seeing a counselor and eventually reconciled with John. This kind of troubling behavior was unusual for her. Brittany had been a carefree child. She talked about becoming a nurse and was also passionate about soccer.
She was just the fastest on that field, no matter what team she played. It's the one thing that every coach always said was, I've never seen a girl that fast.
Brittany, she's energetic, happy-go-lucky. She was the type of person that would walk into a room, no matter if it was the most depressing day of the week, she would light up that room.
But Brittany's fun-loving spirit is dampened on Wednesday, April 22nd, when her mother refuses her request to go to Myrtle Beach for spring break. Brittany vents to her boyfriend, John, after leaving the house in a huff.
When Brittany had told her mom that she wanted to go to South Carolina, her mom, obviously being a parent, said, no way, you're not going to South Carolina. You're 17 years old. And Brittany retaliated. She got into a fight with her mom. Brittany gave me a call. I came and picked her up and took her to her friend's house.
Later that day, Brittany makes one last request to go to Myrtle Beach.
Well, she had to call and apologized how she acted that day. She says, Mom, can I go to Myrtle Beach? And I told her no. And she goes, why? And I said, Brittany, because first of all, I don't know the people that you're going with. I said, there's no parents. And I said, something's gonna happen. And I said, I don't want anything to happen to you.
Brittany then proposes a new idea for her spring break. She asks her mother if she can spend the rest of her vacation at a friend's house nearby. Her mother agrees. Brittany promises to stay in touch by cell phone over the next few days. But in reality, Brittany makes very different plans, which she shares with her boyfriend, John.
She said, you know, a bunch of my friends want me to go down to Myrtle Beach with them. And I told her, I think it's a good idea. I think you can get away from Rochester. I think it would do you good if you go down to South Carolina for 3 days. Because really, in my eyes, what was gonna happen in 3 days?
Coming up, Brittany's boyfriend's words come back to haunt him.
I knew something was wrong. I knew that there was a problem of 30 minutes going by without talking to her.
Before 17-year-old Brittany Drexel disappears, she has an emotional fight with her mother, Dawn, who has refused to let her go to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for spring break. Frustrated, Brittany asks to spend the rest of her vacation instead with a friend who lives nearby her home in Rochester, New York. Her mother agrees. But Brittany has no intention of staying in upstate New York. She decides to make the trip to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, over 14 hours and 6 states away. She visits her boyfriend John at work before leaving.
It's a difficult memory for me to think about because I had that running in the back of my head, just as everybody does when they're saying goodbye to somebody for a period of time. I think, you know, what if this is the last time I see them? What if something happens? But then I pushed those thoughts to the side and thought, it's only 3 days.
Brittany leaves Rochester with 4 other friends Wednesday night, hoping to be at the beach by the next morning.
The people that she went down with, I thought were trusting people. I didn't know them personally. She did ask me to come, and I could not go because I had work.
Over the next few days, Brittany and John are in constant contact via cell phone, sometimes texting several times an hour. She tells him that she is staying at a hotel on the beach called the Bar Harbor Hotel.
While she was down there, her first few texts were, this weather is incredible. I mean, there's palm trees. Being out by the ocean, it was incredible.
But it isn't only the soft sand and inviting water that entice Brittany and her friends. With an abundance of bars and clubs, the area is a paradise for high schoolers enjoying independence for the first time. While the drinking age is 21, many of the clubs allow kids as young as 17 to enter.
The bars and the clubs down at Myrtle Beach, it's more based around money. They can get tons of teenagers to come in, and if they turn the blind eye to the fact that they're 16, 17 years old, they're still gonna make the money.
Brittany takes full advantage of her spring break freedom. She tells her mom that she's watching movies at her friend's house in Rochester, while sharing with John that she is having an amazing vacation hundreds of miles away.
She was having a ton of fun. She was out having a good time, living the spring break life. She was with a bunch of her friends, having a good time.
But by the second day, all that changes. Brittany starts feeling alienated from her friends.
Brittany had told me that they were using a lot of drugs. She wasn't into the drug scene, and therefore she tried to exclude herself from that, and she tried doing things on her own. She walked to the restaurant by herself. She walked down to the beach by herself. Clearly, being in South Carolina, being a 100-pound, pretty teenage girl, that's not an area where you want to be by yourself.
Early Friday evening, Brittany runs into a male friend from Rochester. 20-year-old Peter Brozowitz works for several local Rochester nightclubs. He's staying with some friends at the Blue Water Resort in Myrtle Beach, just a mile away from Brittany's hotel.
Peter Brozowitz was a kid who I didn't know personally, but Brittany did. He was always out at the parties at the clubs, so we became acquaintances through just the parties and knowing the same people. I assumed, being a good friend to Brittany, that he would watch over her.
On Saturday afternoon, Brittany's mom and sister, thinking that Brittany is at her friend's house in Rochester, call to say that they just bought her a new pair of soccer cleats. They ask about her plans that day, now that the weather has suddenly shot up into the 80s, unusually warm for Rochester in April.
I asked her where she is, and she says I'm at the beach. Now, it was a decent day here in Rochester, and I thought she was at Charlotte Beach.
Charlotte Beach in Rochester is just 20 minutes from Brittany's house. Dawn still believes that Brittany is nearby and is being supervised by her friend's parents.
I had talked to her and also asked to talk to a parent. She had put someone on the phone, I don't know who that was, and said that it was okay for Brittany to stay there. And I asked Brittany what she had planned on doing later. And she said, well, we're gonna go over to my friend's house and we're just gonna watch movies and not do too much of anything.
Brittany tells her mom that she'll return home the next day and thanks her for letting her spend the past few days with her friends.
She goes, I'll see you tomorrow, and then I love you. And I said, okay, I love you too. And then we hung up.
A seemingly normal conversation will soon take on tragic significance. It becomes the last time Dawn talks to her daughter before she disappears. Meanwhile, Brittany decides to meet up with her friend Peter. Before she goes, she borrows a pair of shorts from one of her friends. At around 8 o'clock, Brittany texts John en route to meet Peter at the Blue Water Resort. She continues to report that she is having a miserable time and that she is looking forward to coming home the next day.
She hated being down there, and she didn't like the people she went down with.
Shortly after arriving at the Blue Water Resort, Brittany receives a text from her friend saying she wants her shorts back so she can wear them that night. Annoyed, Brittany tells Peter she has to walk back to her hotel, which is over a mile down the road. She texts John as she leaves.
And it was, I can't wait to come home. I can't wait to see you. I'm so angry at everybody down here. I said, I think that you should have a good time. Just try to relax. It's your last night. Try to enjoy it. You're down there anyways. You might as well try to enjoy it before you come home and get back to school.
Brittany and John text each other as she leaves the Blue Water Resort. But then, something strange happens. She stops responding to his messages.
I knew that something was up about 10 to 20 minutes later. But a half an hour later was when I really began to start freaking out. Me and Brittany talked every 10 minutes on the phone. I knew something was wrong. I knew that there was a problem of 30 minutes going by without talking to her.
An hour later, John is worried. He threatens to tell her mom the truth about where Brittany really is if she doesn't text him back.
I called Brittany, and there was no response. So I texted her, and I said, if she didn't get in contact with me, I was gonna call her mom. And I was gonna break the news to the family that she was down in South Carolina. A couple minutes went by, she didn't text me back, didn't call me back.
Meanwhile, Dawn Drexel, Brittany's mother, is just returning home after having dinner with a few friends when she gets the call from John.
Her mom said, I'm gonna kill her. Like, there's no way that she went behind my back and did this without letting me know about it. And she was initially very angry, as any parent would be if they found out their kid was 14 hours away.
It wasn't registering until it started to sink in and I was thinking about it. Well, my heart dropped. I mean, what do you mean you can't find my daughter? And I started freaking out.
As soon as Dawn gets off the phone with John, she desperately tries to get in touch with Brittany.
When we were first texting her and calling her that night that she went missing, it would keep ringing and ringing and ringing, and then it started just to go to voicemail.
When I finished up work, it was 11 o'clock at night, and I got in my car and I headed right to Brittany's house. And I walked in the door, and the whole family was sitting at the table, and I sat down and started to explain what happened.
Dawn calls the Rochester police, but they can't do much from upstate New York. So John reaches out to a friend of Brittany's in North Carolina, who drives straight to Myrtle Beach to file a missing persons report with local police. Meanwhile, Brittany's family and friends continue trying to reach her by phone, but each call goes straight to voicemail. The next morning, Brittany's mom, boyfriend, grandparents, and 2 friends head down to Myrtle Beach to search for Brittany, while her father, Chad, looks after her siblings.
Here I am driving down to Myrtle Beach, and I am just beside myself, thinking, how could this happen to my daughter? Where is she? Am I going to be able to find her?
Coming up, investigators get a break when they discover surveillance footage that could help them. Brittany Drexel has slipped off to Myrtle Beach, South Carolina for spring break, unbeknownst to her parents. At about 9 p.m., Saturday, April 25th, she's walking to her hotel while texting her boyfriend John, when suddenly her texts stop. Brittany is not seen or heard from again. Myrtle Beach Police Lieutenant Joseph Kapp and Detective Vincent Dorio head the investigation. As police begin the search for Brittany, her mother, her boyfriend John, her grandparents, and 2 friends are still en route from Rochester, New York to Myrtle Beach.
Trip down to South Carolina, I don't think anybody slept. It was extremely difficult because we knew that we're going down there to search for Brittany missing. It almost was a step out of reality. It was almost like this couldn't be happening.
Brittany has been missing about 12 hours. Myrtle Beach police launch an intensive search, fanning out in all directions from the hotel where Brittany was last seen. They canvass beaches and local hotels, looking for possible leads. Police find the friends with whom Brittany traveled from Rochester. They tell detectives they haven't been able to reach her since she disappeared and have no idea where she could be. When Brittany's mother meets with Myrtle Beach investigators, they ask her about Brittany's home life.
They thought she ran away. And I know my daughter didn't run away. I mean, she was going to be 18. She felt like she was a grown-up. She was also looking at colleges and things like that.
No indication that she did a lot of drinking or anything of that nature while she was here.
Her brother and sister, she loves to death, and she would never leave them. Never up and leave them, willingly.
The morning after Brittany's last contact with her boyfriend, John, Myrtle Beach police are still hopeful this case will resolve quickly, like so many other spring break missing persons cases.
Especially with kids, is they'll go and sit on the beach and talk. They lose track of time is generally what happens.
Detective Dorio and Lieutenant Cap begin to work a lead. They learn that Peter Brozowitz, the young man Brittany went to see the night before, left town with his buddies at about 2 a.m. that morning, about 5 hours after Brittany vanished.
It appeared that they had left suddenly in the night. They had forgotten clothing and they didn't get a deposit. And I mean, these contributing factors appeared to be very, very suspicious.
As soon as Peter arrives back in Rochester, he is quick to acquire the representation of a criminal defense attorney. Investigators begin piecing together Brittany's last hours. On the way from her hotel to visit Peter and his friends at the Blue Water Resort, a traffic camera captures her walking and texting at about 8:15 p.m.
We do see her, she's walking alone and using her phone. And we verify that she was calling the people that she was going to visit to try and find the location of the motel.
According to Peter, Brittany left his room shortly after she arrived to go back to her hotel and return the pair of shorts to her friend. Detective Dorio checks the surveillance tapes of the Blue Water Resort. They verify Peter's story.
We get her going through the motel's front lobby doors, and then a short time later, exiting the motel and going northbound towards her motel.
Detective Dorio can now pinpoint the time Brittany left the Blue Water Resort, 8:48 p.m. Police estimate it should have taken Brittany about 15 minutes to reach the traffic camera on the return trip to her hotel.
Reviewing the tape on the traffic camera, we learned that Brittany never made it that far.
Somewhere between the Blue Water Resort and her own hotel, Brittany vanishes. Police continue to question Peter, the last known person to see Brittany Drexel. They're curious about his departure in the middle of the night, shortly after Brittany disappeared.
Peter totally cooperated with us. I mean, yes, he got an attorney, but he and his attorney were straightforward.
Peter tells them one of his friends was pressured by his mother to return to Rochester as soon as possible.
We followed up on all the information, what they told us they had done.
After investigating Peter's story, police find no evidence that he and his friends had anything to do with Brittany's disappearance. Unfortunately, investigators have no other leads on what may have happened to her, but they do obtain Brittany's cell phone records. What they find is not what they expect. The last known location of her cell phone is over an hour away in a very unwelcoming area. Coming up, is Brittany still alive?
It's the most horrific thing you would want to go through as a parent.
Get more Disappeared online at investigation.discovery.com. While Myrtle Beach police search the city for 17-year-old Brittany Drexel, Detective Vincent Dorio is investigating the last minutes before she disappears. On April 25th, 2009, what should have been the last night of her vacation, Brittany vanishes after visiting her friend Peter at the Blue Water Resort.
She was still in Myrtle Beach.
Graham Moore, a local reporter, has been tracking Brittany's case since her disappearance.
They were in the hotel room. I don't think she was there that long. She got a call from her friend saying, hey, can you bring me back my shorts? She left there, from what I understand. She was texting with her boyfriend.
The Blue Water's surveillance tapes show Brittany leaving at 8:48 p.m. But Brittany never appears on footage from a traffic camera along the way, returning to her hotel. Now, With her cell phone records in hand, detectives hope to learn what happened during those crucial few minutes.
At 8:58, she writes back to John, "No, I'm staying in, packing, and going to sleep probably." At that point, John asks, "Why, babe? Why, boo?"
According to Brittany's cell phone records, this exchange with John, her boyfriend back in Rochester, occurs 10 minutes after she leaves the Blue Water Resort. She is supposed to be walking back to her hotel, just over a mile away. But the records show that suddenly, all outbound activity from Brittany's phone stops after this text.
About 9:15, he starts writing back again, "Hey, why aren't you answering me? I'm concerned." At that point, that's when he starts text messaging her over and over, "Where are you? You okay?"
John texts some of the friends who traveled with Brittany to see if they can reach her, giving investigators their next lead.
And they start making calls, and that's how we're able to start tracking her as the phone is going southbound.
Anytime one of her friends called Brittany, her cell phone would ping or communicate with the nearest cell phone tower. This tells investigators the approximate location of Brittany's phone at that moment. Although she is supposed to be heading north towards her hotel, at 9:27 p.m., about 30 minutes after her last text, the data reveals that Brittany's phone is heading southbound on Route 17. Her phone is pinging cell towers in an area called Surfside Beach, almost 7 miles south of Myrtle Beach. It would take 2 hours to walk there and about 15 minutes by car.
The phone itself, because we're not sure if she was separated from the phone, was moving at a high enough rate of speed that it was in a vehicle.
Police aren't sure if the cell phone battery then dies or if it gets destroyed. But at 11:58 p.m., just 3 hours after Brittany's last text to John, her phone last pings tower number 332. It's located 2 counties and over 50 miles south of Myrtle Beach, near Georgetown County.
If you look at the timeline of the cell phone, made this 50-mile trek in a relatively short period of time. So it wasn't like it meandered down through the night. That cell phone made a beeline for Georgetown County.
The area is near the North Santee River, around the Pole Yard boat landing. It's an isolated, rural spot.
This right here is off the beaten path. There's nothing but country surrounding this area. The folks that would know it are fishermen or some of the locals from the town of Georgetown, maybe just across the river.
A 17-year-old from Rochester, New York is not going to end up at Pole Yard boat landing on a Saturday night during her spring break. It's a very rural part of the county, surrounded by water.
Myrtle Beach police launched their search here, in the area covered by cell phone tower number 332.
This right here is in the cell phone zone. It's about 4 miles wide, 5 miles deep. They staged here. The searchers then branched out to other likely zones.
The terrain in these parts is notoriously forbidding.
We have alligators in the river. There are wild hogs, plenty of snakes, lots of biting insects. It's not a very hospitable place for anybody to be at.
You can't imagine the conditions searchers had to go through. Flies the size of golf balls. Very hot, very humid, very thick brush. A lot of dangerous wildlife.
After investigators conduct an initial search and find no trace of Brittany, local police and other agencies join forces to expand the effort.
Because of the phone, it goes through Horry, Georgetown, and Charleston County. So we have 3 different large agencies working this together.
Georgetown and Charleston furnished their boats with their sonar, and we checked the rivers. Charleston County had their helicopter there.
They did a massive ground search. They were running their ATVs through there every 20 minutes to get the alligators to back off so the dogs could come through. They had 6 shooters with their dogs because of the boar. I mean, it was just very dangerous.
While investigators comb the area, Dawn and Brittany's other loved ones hold out hope for some sign of Brittany.
There's a lot of questions going through my mind. It's the most horrific thing you would want to go through as a parent.
It was very intense. There were long days. There was a lot of ground covered. There was a lot of hope in the beginning that something was going to be found. It was about a week long of just intense searching, hundreds of volunteers out there, looking for that cell phone, looking for any clue of Brittany.
Monica Kaysen, director of the Q Center for Missing Persons, a family advocacy group that assembles volunteer search parties, is called in to help.
We were going in the first 11 days that Brittany disappeared. We searched sunup to sundown every day. All of the probable areas that people enter, the probable areas someone could have pulled offside the road, dirt roads with nobody lives on them at all.
Authorities know that the treacherous wildlife gives Brittany a slim chance of survival.
The urgency was there to get her before the wild animals did.
You know, there's always going to be hope. But while we're doing these searches, we certainly had numerous cadaver dogs.
When they had been doing the search, they had told me, they said if she's in this area, she would have been ate within 6 hours. You know, and I felt like they're thinking she's not alive, which scared me even more. I mean, you become frantic. I mean, you never think of your child going before you do.
The search teams find no sign of Brittany. Investigators continue combing the area and looking for leads, while Brittany's family and friends return to Rochester.
Coming home without Brittany was very, very difficult. I came home, her little brother Camden came over to my house and he goes, "I thought you were bringing Britt home." And I just looked at him and I was like, "I'm so sorry. She's not with me." Her little brother and her little sister asked me, "Where is she? Why isn't she with you?" And being as young as they are, it's hard to tell them answers.
I came back home and I walked upstairs and I had her pictures up. I had her clothes folded on my bed. I had like all of her stuff still reminding me it's not a dream. It's not made up in my imagination. Brittany's really missing.
Where's my little girl? Is my little girl being tortured? Did my little girl get hurt and die? If that happened, how do I explain it to my little one? How do I do that? That Daddy can keep you safe from that. How do I do that? I just tell her that I will be here for you, that I'm not going to leave any of you guys.
Coming up, the investigation into Brittany's disappearance seems completely stalled until 8 months after she goes missing, when a potential clue finally emerges.
A week-long search for missing spring breaker Brittany Drexel turned up a possible piece of evidence in her disappearance.
While on spring break in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Police have no promising leads in the case. Finally, in mid-December, investigators get a tip. It prompts them to search an area just north of where they had previously traced Brittany's cell phone. They scour the banks of the Santee River, surrounded by swamps and alligators.
The Georgetown County had asked us to check out an area that was a tip called in. We went over there to check it out. During that search, we were notified that the sunglasses were found.
While combing the area, authorities get an intriguing lead. A pair of sunglasses that could be Brittany's is spotted on the muddy embankment of the Santee River.
On the second day of that search, a man and his wife were on a boat. They had docked along the riverbank there, went to collect some firewood and came across a pair of sunglasses. They had seen the night before on the news that searchers were out there looking for a missing girl, and they thought it was odd, the place that they found these sunglasses. They found these sunglasses on a pretty desolate part of the riverbank. Investigators were pretty hopeful when they found them.
Brittany's mom wants to believe that the glasses could be her daughter's.
I had seen what the sunglasses look like, and I know Brittany had gotten a pair for Easter.
But others are skeptical they belong to Brittany.
I don't recognize them. It doesn't mean that when she was down there, she didn't buy them.
It was months and months after her disappearance. So why all of a sudden are glasses showing up there that don't have all the mud, all the weathered activity on it, the leaves, the branches, all that? It could just be they had hikers and someone lost them out of their backpack.
Since the sunglasses turn up a few miles from where the teams have resumed searching, those close to Brittany's case question whether the appearance of this potential clue might be calculated.
Someone may have put them there that has been getting some heat from the authorities and wanted to try to bring the search elsewhere from this property or this area to this area now.
Were they meant to be found? I feel confident that, if someone did put them there, that they wanted to be found.
Investigators send the glasses to forensics for testing.
They sent them off to see if they could collect DNA off of them to make any sort of match. And from what I've been told, there was no DNA on the glasses. Again, another dead end for Dawn Drexel and Brittany's family.
In early April, a few weeks before the one-year anniversary of Brittany's disappearance, police announced that they have identified 3 to 4 persons of interest in the case.
The people that we're looking at, I feel really good about. All of our little pieces of evidence, they haven't been tied in yet, but they're all pointing in the same direction, towards certain people.
Detectives will not reveal more information, yet they say they now believe this is no longer a missing persons case, but a homicide. However, Detective Dorio still needs more to file charges.
Just a matter of time now before everything gets put together and we can say, yes, here's a solid arrest.
While investigators continue pursuing the case, Dawn Drexel has her own theory and believes Brittany may have been abducted.
I think Brittany is still alive. I think somebody's holding her against her will. I've heard a lot about human trafficking. Anybody can be a trafficker. That person could be somebody that you meet and become friends with. It could be somebody that promises you, a modeling career, or you can make this much money, or anything.
If you know Brittany, if you're close to Brittany, you gotta watch out for her. You cannot let her just walk around by herself because she thinks that nothing can hurt her. She's too trusting of people, and you need to watch out for her.
However, authorities are skeptical that this is a human trafficking case.
We've got no indication. We've had no history. Most of your human trafficking, they target victims where there's a language barrier, and generally where human trafficking takes place, it continues to take place. We've had nothing prior or since that would be an indicator.
Human trafficking in South Carolina is not a problem that I know about, at least. Being from South Carolina, you never hear about human trafficking.
We can't eliminate it, but it's certainly not at the forefront of our investigation.
In an effort to generate new leads in the investigation, police released to the media a new and important piece of evidence.
There is some new information in the disappearance of a New York teenager who vanished nearly a year ago on a spring.
A video of Brittany Drexel, shot just 24 hours before she disappeared.
Hey, Brett.
What?
A college student from the Midwest, who had also been vacationing in Myrtle Beach, shot this video on the night of Friday, April 24th, after befriending Brittany along Ocean Boulevard.
There were some kids that were antagonizing her because she was a really pretty girl. Some kids were yelling at her and antagonizing her, and so she asked some kid, will you walk with me, so that they stopped yelling towards me.
They talked and they went to her motel room, and he did a short video clip of her while they were talking. And it was confirmed that it was, in fact, Brittany.
Investigators verified that the student has an alibi and has no knowledge of Brittany's whereabouts.
Once he was aware that he had video, he and his family contacted us and relinquished the video to us.
Brittany Drexel has yet to be found.
The video receives national attention
Now, never-before-seen images have surfaced from the night before she disappeared.
A boy she had met on spring break shot this cell phone video at a hotel.
Unfortunately, nothing emerges that enables police to make an arrest. Back in Rochester, Brittany's loved ones struggle to make some sense out of her disappearance. They try to move on with their lives while honoring Brittany.
At this point, I'm advocating for Brittany, but I'm also trying to get the awareness out to all these parents that think that this could never happen to their child. Teenagers, you know, they think they're invincible and that this could never happen, but these parents need to know that this happens all the time and have them be aware.
I am now studying criminal justice because I want to help find girls who are missing, and I want to be the person who is able to catch that person who has done it. And I'm going to be the best that I can be so I can be that person that will give those families justice.
Brittany's family and friends do not give up hope that one day they will hear from her again.
We just miss her to our souls and wish her to come home. Obviously, it's my little girl, but this isn't about me. This is about her brother and her sister. They need her. We all need her, but they need her.